Our next interview is Gordon Hollis of Golden Legend Books. And Gordon, I'm going to start you off with the same question I start everybody off with. Tell us a little bit about your background, family, schools, where you grew up, etc.
Sure. I'm probably the only antiquarian bookseller from the state of Nebraska. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. I went to high school there. Afterwards, I was in the United States Air Force in the 60s before Vietnam got hot. When I got out, my mom had returned to New York City, where she was from. And so I worked for a publishing company called Plenum, which I think is still in business.
I know Plenum well.
They had a project to do facsimile of every incunable, and I didn't know what it was, but I took a look at an astronomy book, 15th century astronomy book, and I said, I want the whole thing. And I tried to buy the entire, I didn't have any money. I tried to buy the whole thing. For me, books have always been very symbolic objects. I always aspired to be around great works, thinking some of it would rub off. Didn't. After after the service, I went through college and graduate school in English literature and became a refugee from the PhD programs because they told me at the University of Chicago that I could go ahead for my PhD, learn a little bit of Greek, but don't expect to work. So after my master's degree, I went back. I knocked around for a while trying to find some kind of a career that would reflect my interests. I didn't like big cities, left New York, ended up in Colorado. And I walked into a used book shop one day, and I thought, well, that would be an interesting career. I didn't know anyone who'd ever been in the business. And I bought a couple of first editions. I have them both, one by Allen Ginsberg, the other one by William Burroughs. And the bookseller is very, very lovely man, had one reference book, Van Allen Bradley.
VAB.
But I was really interested to know not so much the value, whatever, but where these came from, were there other editions. So somehow I got into the rare books room at the University of Colorado. I walked into a rare books room there, and a man named Ellsworth Mason, a very, very kindly and brilliant librarian. He wrote the definitive work on library architecture, but he was a James Joyce scholar, and he was kind of retiring in Boulder with his new wife. I spent a year with him. I would go in there all the time, and he would say, come here. And he said, this is called the Nuremberg Chronicle. And you look down at the bottom of the pages, and you see A, B, C, D, and he showed me how to collate.
Collation formula?
And and he told me about Kelmscott presses, and he bought an absolutely horrifyingly bad collection of Lord Byron first editions from me, which a dealer in Denver foisted on me for not very much money. And it was so awful, the condition, that I'm sure the CUs never recovered from their purchase. The rare book business appealed to me more than the first edition business because I can go on for a while.
Just keep going, man. I'll interrupt you when I need to.
Okay. The rare book business was lively in first editions, but the real great unknown and the real action is in antiquarian books, as you know. So I knew nothing about antiquarian books, and it became clear to me I wasn't going to really be able to learn it in Boulder, nice town that it was. So with some encouragement from my uncle, who's down in Florida, he said, why don't you just go east and get a job in the book trade? And so I wasn't married at the time. I was very interested in antiquarian books. I really wanted to learn. And as you know, if you're around old books and you don't know anything, you're acutely aware that you don't know anything. You don't know where they come from. You don't know how rare they are. You don't know what they were for. You know nothing, so you have a lot to learn. So the 3 Mile Island week, I drove from Boulder to the East Coast.
Timeline.
Yeah, 79.
79, okay.
Actually, it was probably 70. Yeah, I had been around a couple of years trying to learn about rare books in Boulder. And then I went in 79, right while the 3 Mile Island crisis was happening. I remember driving through Chicago hearing Jimmy Carter say, "I may ask you all to evacuate the East Coast, so don't panic."
Well, I wouldn't panic at anything like that, would you?
No. So that was the end of the first phase.
When did you decide to become a bookseller full time?
It's a hard question to answer because I don't know if I think right away, even in Boulder, I saw the possibilities of it because you don't need capital. You do now, but you didn't need capital then. You just needed background. There was a lot of people who were refugees from, the academia, getting into the first edition business, and they knew who was what. I have a great story. Peter Howard will love this story. First buying trip from Boulder, I went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and I walked up into the Lincoln bookshop, and there were some books by this poet I've heard of named Adrienne Rich. She's a contemporary poet in the 60s and 70s. One of them was inscribed by Auden as well. So I bought them for $4 a piece. Driving back home, I was reading Serendipity's Catalog 21, and there was one of the Adrienne Rich books for $1,700.
That perked you up.
It perked me up. I almost wrecked my car. I sold the book to Peter Howard immediately, and at that moment I understood how the business worked, that the material was available, that your background, your education, whether it would be in American history or the history of, an interest in birds or duck decoys, or in my case in modern literature, was part of your assets. And I said, I'm a bookseller. And I've never looked back. I've never turned back.
Well, what are your specialties?
Well, I grew up with a generation of booksellers who started off with 25-cent books. You've heard the term, I think it's a Larry Moskowitz term, 25-cent books.
Yeah.
That's that's where we all started out. And I always had a great interest in modern first editions, but one day I just snapped off. I was just bored. It was so boring.
A lot of it around.
A lot of it around. It's just a dust jacket. There's nothing to learn.
Yeah.
So I had a very convoluted background, but a few years later I got interested in the history of dancing, and I'm really probably better at that than anything else. And now that 25 years I've been working with it, I've probably seen a majority of Western books on dance.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah, it's experiential.
When you started in the trade, were there any booksellers that you could think of that were particularly helpful, that mentored you or gave you some good advice, pointed you in the right direction, so to speak?
Yeah. Larry Moskowitz was very, very helpful to me, as I mentioned, at the very beginning within the first edition field. A few years later, when I worked in Philadelphia, the whole community was great, in particular Norman Kane, who more than anyone else was just great. I went down there to work in an auction house, and the head of the auction house, the department, Joe Malloy, passed away a week after I got there, and they left me with the department.
Wow.
Well, a funny story. The next day after the funeral, I went back, and John Freeman called me in and said, "Hollis, you know about rare books." I didn't know anything. And he says, and I said, huh? He said, Joe Malloy had been promising the Carpenter's Hall Library an appraisal for 14 years. They just called, and said they're going to sue if you don't start. So go down and do it. Carpenter's Hall is the oldest architectural library in the United States, and it had never been appraised. And I walked in there, and I just had a stroke because I didn't know any of the books. Asher Benjamin on back, Napoleon's Egypt. There was pamphlets on husbandry, carpentry. There was all sorts of stuff, which you probably know. So I cried help, and Norman came to my aid, introduced me to all of the people in town, from Wilman Spawn, American Philosophical Society, Ed Wolfe, to Hal Heaney, and to William Allen, to David Shefchek, who was working there, to, it could go on and on and on, Don Cresswell. And the Philadelphia community helped me a great deal, but in particular Norman. I'm very fond of him.
Talk a little bit about the Internet, Gordon. How the advent of the Internet has affected your business. How was your transition from non-computer to computer? Give us a little background on that.
I've written on this.
You may have, but now you're going to be seen saying it.
Yeah, well, it totally destroyed the middle market. It made the bookseller into either an expert or he went out of business, because there's no point in selling a book, offering a book where 20 copies exist on the line. So you do things that are not on the web. So it makes you an instant expert. If you're going to keep up with the field, you have to look and see what's not available. So a big part of it was that the marketplace for selling changed. I don't sell much on the Internet because I'm really very specialized. I sell mostly through my regular contacts and the new ones I make, who are dance librarians, dance historians, whatever they like. You know, they're interested in the ballet russe or one aspect or the other. Got collectors from Japan. So I email them, and that's been useful, but that's no faster than the fax. It's a little bit easier. The other big area of change via the Internet is the ability to do research. Has been unbelievably helpful.
Yeah. Google this or Google that.
Well, yeah, for starters, but if you want to know how many copies of a book is available, go to OCLC. If you want to do research, you go to the Society of Dance History Scholars website. If you have a strange name like Theodore Kozloff in the back, you'd have to rummage through your reference library, go to UCLA. It's very time intensive, as you know, in your field. Here now you just keep Googling it it's changed immensely.
Do you buy much on the Internet?
I do, and I hate it because I can't see it. At auction, it's pernicious.
Yeah. But have you had any bad experiences with buying stuff on the Internet? Whatever you've gotten has been as described, or?
No, it's never as described. It's never as described. It's always like, now I asked them for 12 photographs, but it's still not the same as actually seeing it. And it's particularly pernicious at auctions. Because then you can't return it.
Well, unless it's inaccurately described.
No, but if you handled the book and they say it's a very good copy, you say it's okay, and your definition of very good is completely different from theirs, then you have a book you don't stand behind.
Right. Well, that is a problem. But the Internet has certainly, as you said, ruined a whole genre of books. But I've noticed that a lot of people are saying that they've picked up a lot of customers from the Internet, customers they would never have gotten any other way.
Now I find out that people visit my website when they know who I am, and that's a tool, that's a calling card, so they can see what I look like. That the majority of people who buy something from the web don't buy from my strong suit. They buy something else I have online, and they're generally not regular customers. So I find out that book fairs like this are a much better way, or referrals.
On a sort of a dividing scale, what percentage would you say of your business is book fair based, and what percentage of your business is catalog based?
Oh, it's about 10% book fair.
Really?
Yeah.
So you do most of your business through quotes and catalogs?
Yeah. regular customers, my small group of loyal customers.
You're highly specialized.
I've done it on purpose, believing that expertise is a value.
I agree.
And the only trouble is that it's like you go into a very narrow island, and then sometimes you see something else that you'd like to handle, but you really are out of your field already.
Yeah, that is always a problem. Gordon, if you were going to enter the book trade today, how would you do it, or would you do it?
I was talking about this last night with some friends. I'll tell you what I do. I get a used bookshop with a rare book room. Yeah, I remember Biblo and Tannen in New York. It's maybe a smaller store. They had a rare book room in back. And I decorated with some nice chairs and tables and couches. And in the front, I put a huge computer. And I would put a sign saying, your book, any book, printed in 15 minutes. And they come in and they say, books on demand is what it was. They say, oh, my mother had a book on cooking, Norma Bombrek or something. I said, I'll have it for you nicely bound in 15 minutes. Go look around. Go into the rare book room. That's exactly what I do.
Did it work?
In my fantasies, it worked.
What about in the reality?
It's not there yet.
Yeah, it's not there yet.
Bookseller's job has never been to be a boutique expert.
Yeah.
We're writers if we do that, or we're scholars. That's cool. We're historians. But a bookseller's job is to make his books accessible to the public. And until we find a way to compete with the internet or Google Books, we won't survive.
There's apparently there's some kind of a lawsuit that's coming up between Google and publishers. And it'll be interesting to see how that all
copyright
shakes
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing us as booksellers in the years to come?
Well, it's a great question. I think the biggest challenge is the new world of readers. Let's say that we get past the iPod generation and the curriculum addresses the world as it is rather than as it was 100 years ago. In California, that's really easy to understand because unlike the East Coast, we're such a nation of immigrants so visibly coming in now. And to try to teach Shelley or Keats or Kelly and Sheets, as I call them, to our immigrant groups is really silly. I mean, it's important, but it's so much more important to deal with their own background and what they bring to the table. The curriculum, if it follows suit, will be quite different from what it was. And it'll be interesting to see if we can find books to go along with it.
Do you think that booksellers in the future will be more prone to being generalists or more prone to being specialists?
Specialization has become a very valuable asset in the research library group. It's a different business than it was. We don't have general shops. Very few of us do here in California. And we get called on to do appraisals and to find material if we have the skills, and we only get that skills through experience and specialization.
We had several interviews today. Some of the people we talked to said, oh, you've got to be a generalist. Some of the people we talked to say, no, you've got to be a specialist. And it's kind of like 50-50 down the road right now.
Oh.
So I'm wondering if in fact it's going to stay that way, whether it will be half of us will be specialists and half of us will be generalists.
Well, what do you think?
I think that's the way it's going to be. I don't see it doing anything else right now. But let's move on to the next question. And that would be about the ABAA. As an institution, as an organization, it seems to me that we're top-heavy with over 55s.
Yeah.
And we're very low on under 40s.
Yeah.
Now, how do you perceive this for the future? Do you see us continuing on as an organization with all of this top-heavy dealers going to be retiring and passing on? I mean, to me, it seems like there's a void that needs to be filled for us to keep going.
Absolutely. I think in the history of bookselling, it's had ebbs and flows. And I think it's a very hardy, long-lasting career. I think now people really have not been fooled. The value of data is undeniable, but the whole context, the cultural history of the book hasn't been lost, and people find it easy to respond to books as a form. So I don't see it going away. I think your question was, what's it going to be like in the future, and whether young people will be coming into it. I think young people have really never come into book selling very readily. It's always been the unusual person compared to Europe, where it's a mainstay.
Yeah, and they're especially, they apprentice and they have to spend a certain amount of time in a bookstore before they're eligible for...
In Germany, that's correct. Yeah. But even in London, it's fine if you graduate from Oxford and Cambridge, like Amanda Hall, Chris Edwards, to come down to Sotheby's and work in the trade or work at Pickering and Chatto, so it's a respectable field. Yeah. Here in this country, it's always been a little bit off. It's not as fashionable. I don't see that changing. I see it becoming more geeky. That until this is solved, maybe the people who come in it are really geeks by nature, and they want to be perceived that way, and they become, real dyed-in-the-wool experts.
Well, what's the future look like for you? Are you going to continue on with Golden Legend? Are you going to continue to be a bookseller, or are you thinking about doing something else?
It's really funny. I just read that James Fold passed away. He was the wonderful music collector who sold his books to the Morgan. Now, I met him because I deal in music. I met James. He called me on his 91st birthday. I was in my car, and I got a call from James Fold. Lovely man. He said, "Do you have anything interesting Gershwin for me?" And I said, "I'd love to sell you something, but I don't have anything new." Now, this didn't kill him, but I think the lack of something new and exciting
eventually got to him.
Got to him at age 91. Marian Malkin died at 88 or 90. John Ward. Wonderful collectors find strength and energy. I see my own personal business getting more abstract, doing more writing, doing more specialized work. It's really very challenging, and I'm sure very boring. But
I'm not so sure that's the case. Just as a parting shot, if a young bookseller comes to you and says, "Mr. Hollis, what would be the one or two things you could advise me to do to make a go of it in the book trade?" What would you say?
Depends how busy and annoyed I was. If I had time for a young person...
Let's say you have time.
I would say it's a wonderful career. You need to get to know all the people and have experiences and get to know the rare book community and the people involved, and get to see a lot of books and find out if you love it. If you love it, you'll do well.
But if you don't love it?
It's a hard way of making a living. You should do this. People who have success in what they do love what they do. But it's a very interesting field. So I think that they need to be successful, and they really need to get a joy out of that and cut their own path.
Sounds great. Thanks very much, Gordon. Great interview. Appreciate you participating. Thank you.